Hi, everybody. My name is Alexander Kolokotronis. I'm the chapter co-chair for Central Connecticut Democratic Socialists of America. We're really excited for this event tonight. And we're here today for a number of reasons. We're here to celebrate the rollout of Right to Counsel, which this coalition won last year, a coalition of all of these organizations you see right now on your screen. Now with the implementation of Right to Counsel, though, Connecticut is just the second state in the country to implement a right to counsel for tenants during eviction proceedings. So we'll learn first more about the rollout and how to access free legal representation. We'll also hear from our speakers about the impact of right to counsel. We'll get to share our own stories about housing insecurity, about eviction, other issues we faced around housing. We'll be doing that in breakout groups. So we'll have a portion in which we'll be able to ask questions to each other, share with each other. In the main presentations or main room presentations and speaking sections, we won't be doing a kind of live Q&A. We'll try to address questions that people we encourage to put in the chat, but we won't be doing that again in a kind of vocalized manner throughout the event. We'll try to address those along the way or at the close. And again, in the breakout groups, that'll be an opportunity for people to speak with each other and ask questions of each other as well. After the breakouts, we'll return to our speaker section. Again, we'll be talking about how we can fight back, how to get involved in the tenant movement to win permanent funding for right to counsel so that all tenants in Connecticut can have free legal representation. Just a note as to why we're starting now. We plan to push for permanent funding in the 2023 legislative session. But because this is a big lift in our state, which has in the last how many decades governed through austerity language, discourse, decision-making, we need to start organizing now. And so we recognize that. We won right to counsel because we're a movement of tenants, labor, healthcare providers, racial justice activists, and more. And so we know that the only way we'll win permanent funding for right to counsel is by building power through organizing. First, before we move into our next section, I want to make, again, the housekeeping note around questions. We won't be addressing questions in a kind of Q&A format, but again, we encourage you to put the questions in the chat box and we'll try to address along the way. Next, now we will talk about right to counsel and how we want it. And first, we'll go to Dahlia about right to counsel and the rollout.
Thanks so much, Alex. So my name is Dahlia Romanow. I am a member of the Central Connecticut DSA and also a staff attorney at the Connecticut Fair Housing Center. And I'm just going to go very briefly over kind of the big key points about the logistics of the rollout. So the right to counsel rollout began on January 31st in the 14 zip codes that were chosen because they have some of the highest rates of eviction in the state. And with those 14 zip codes, approximately 25% of tenants who face eviction should be covered by the right to counsel program. And as Alex mentioned, Connecticut is just the second state to be implementing a right to counsel program. And so this is kind of a new and exciting thing. And we're here to celebrate that, but also to kind of talk about how we can support this program and make sure that it is as successful as it can be. And I'm not going to go through and list out all of the zip codes, but you can see them on the slide there. They're kind of many of the cities that you would expect to be covered. Okay. And so just kind of logistics, tenants are required to get a notice from the landlord that explains the right to counsel program anytime that they get a notice to quit or they get the papers that tell them that their landlord is starting a summary process case, which is just another word for an eviction case against them. And they can then apply for legal representation through the right to counsel program by calling the number that you see on the slide, and can also access information about the program on that website, which I encourage everyone to check out, evictionhelpct.org, which is what the program is also being called by the state. And so right now, the state has seeded the program with $20 million of federal funds, which came from the American Rescue Plan relief funding that we got. And this will get the program off the ground, provide legal representation to tenants in many of the areas of the state which have experienced highest rates of eviction. But we don't currently have permanent funding, and we don't currently have enough funding to cover every tenant in the state. And so we need to keep pushing, and we need to make sure that this program has permanent funding and expands to be able to cover all tenants facing eviction, not just tenants in these specific 14 zip codes. And working on a short timeline, so I'm just going to pass it off to Luke and keep this going.
Thanks, Dahlia. Hey, everybody. My name is Luke. I'm a tenant organizer with DSA as well. I'm really excited and feeling like some nostalgia to be on this call with you all, because Right to Counsel in 2021 was really my introduction to this kind of organizing. It was the first political project that I had ever really worked on, certainly the first legislative campaign. So it's just great to be back with so many people who also worked on that campaign last year, and people who put in so many hours and so much energy into making this a reality. So, you know, this is exciting to kind of be back together again. I just wanted to sort of recap for those who were there and for those who weren't what our campaign looked like in 2021. This came from a pretty sort of last minute decision, truly, of the Housing Justice Project within the DSA chapter. We were in bad COVID times in winter of 2020. We were all online, we were in lockdown, and we decided to go for it with Right to Counsel. It had been something that we had been talking about for a while, that different kind of advocates and people in the housing justice space in Connecticut had been talking about for a while. But we decided to go for it and launch a campaign. And we built a coalition. This was not just DSA, this was not just legal aid organizations. This was a broad and diverse coalition of 40 organizations, many of whom are represented on this call, that decided that this was a priority, particularly during the pandemic, but always for tenants facing the violence of eviction. To go through it alone without legal representation was simply unjust. And so getting this bill passed was a priority for many organizations with a concern for tenants' rights and social justice. It intersects with so many of the concerns that many of us are very passionate about. So our approach was not to sort of simply do a advocacy approach. We wanted this to be rooted in grassroots organizing and to get us in touch with the tenants that this really matters for. And so we did a lot of community outreach. We did a lot of events, speaking to neighborhood groups, you know, getting tenants to talk to their neighbors, doing flyering in our own neighborhoods. We did a lot of events on Facebook Live. We just got the word out there to a broad and diverse group of people across Connecticut to explain why this matters for all of us. And the fruit of that was that we kind of developed a whole new cohort of tenant organizers and people passionate about tenant organizing. I certainly count myself in that group. And since, you know, June of 2021, when we saw this get passed, we have really turned our energy towards tenant organizing and forming tenants unions, which you'll hear more about as we go through the rest of this call. But the Right to Counsel campaign was not just an isolated campaign to get this one bill passed, but it has fueled a broader tenants movement across Connecticut that we are continuing to build on, and we really see those things as inextricably linked. You know, our philosophy of how social change happens, political change, and how economic justice is achieved is through people power. It's through workers and tenants standing up for themselves, recognizing how much power they actually have when they exercise it together in solidarity with each other. And so that was our model for our first campaign. It's going to be our model for this second campaign as we go into the fight for 2023.
Great. Thank you for that, Luke. Now we will transition to our first set of speakers. So first up, we'll have John Pollock. He's the coordinator of the National Coalition for a Civil Right to Counsel. Then we'll have State Representative Robin Porter, who represents parts of Hamden and New Haven. Afterwards, we'll have Leslie Blateau, the president of the New Haven Federation of Teachers. Then we'll have Kay Pittman, leader in the Quinnipiac Gardens Tenants Union. And then Dion Dwyer, leader in PT Partners and a president of the resident council at the PT Barnum community in Bridgeport. Right now, I'll pass it first to John.
Thank you very much. And it is a pleasure to be here today to talk with all of you and celebrate and talk about this wonderful achievement that you've had and how it fits into the national movement. I'm going to share my screen real fast so that I can go through a couple of slides real quick. So what I'm going to talk a little bit about is, basically why people fight for the right to counsel in housing court and for tenants facing eviction, and then where the national movement is. Basically, the reasons are the main reason why we fight for this and why people fight for this nationally is that housing, the loss of housing basically implicates every other kind of basic human need that a person can have at stake, which is besides their home, the place where their family gathers, the protection from the elements, the things that can potentially be imperiled if you lose your home, access to your children's access to their schools, your physical belongings, your employment if you can't stay in the community, your mental and physical health, and if you are homeless as a result of eviction, even potentially your physical liberty, because you can wind up being jailed. That leads to a whole host of criminal consequences and collateral civil consequences that flow from that. So really, housing is at the core of so many of the things that we hold dear, and the loss of which basically imperils all of those basic human needs. In Connecticut, as is the case across the country, basically the representational imbalance is extremely severe. Nationally, our figures indicate that about 81% of landlords have access to representation, only 3% of tenants. So that is a huge disparity. And the courts have essentially adapted themselves in many ways to serve the needs of the represented party. The landlords and their attorneys have a much better understanding of the procedures. They have a much closer relationship with the court. So it has caused a real culture of sort of meeting the needs of what the landlords and their attorneys have, and not so much the tenants. That massive imbalance is also explains why in most places the default rate for tenants not appearing or not even responding to the complaint is usually over half. There's been such systemic disempowerment in housing court that tenants rightfully feel like there's very little that will happen for them if they go to court and try to participate. From a race equity standpoint, we know that tenants of color are more often the tenants facing eviction, especially Black women who face eviction at twice the rate of white tenants in most states across the country. The proceedings are also extremely complex. The evictions are often thought of as very simple, sort of a tenant didn't pay the rent and that's really all that there is. But actually there are significant defenses that the tenant can have if the unit has not been maintained, if the notice or the service wasn't done correctly. There could be disputes about whether the tenant did in fact pay the rent or whether it wasn't accounted for correctly. There could have been illegal harassment or other discrimination. And then during COVID, as there have been more protections added, including rental assistance, many tenants have had difficulty accessing those new protections without counsel. And in fact, one statistic that just came out of Cleveland was that a huge number of tenants there coming through their right to counsel program were not aware of rental assistance before they encountered legal aid. And then almost all of them were successfully able to get rental assistance because of that interaction with legal assistance. The studies have continually shown, and I'll show you some of the data out of the right to counsel programs, that having representation makes an enormous difference in what happens in court, both in terms of the outcomes for tenants and also for cities and states in terms of the money that they save by not having tenants be evicted and then their kids wind up in foster care, or they wind up homeless and then in a shelter, or all the other costs that eviction brings to communities. And the weight of public opinion has really shifted on this. This slide really shows some of the recent data on where people feel nationally about the right to counsel. And amazingly, across the political spectrum, people either strongly support or somewhat support the right to counsel for tenants facing eviction. This is a real paradigm shift from where we were 5 years ago. I think as a result of all of the incredible organizing and the attention, we've just seen, a lot of cities and states move in this direction, and the media also be incredibly focused on this issue. So where we are right now, there are 16 jurisdictions that have passed a right to counsel in just the last 5 years. 13 of those are cities, 3 of them are states, including Connecticut. That is really an amazing passage rate. And in addition, in 2021, besides Connecticut and the other 2 states that passed it, there were bills introduced in a half dozen other states. Many of those bills are actually back this year for potential passage, and we're actually quite optimistic we're going to see at least a couple of states pass right to counsel in 2022. And there's also been federal legislation by a number of different representatives. And in fact, Representative Presley in Massachusetts just filed a bill last week to provide extensive funding for tenant representation. So we're seeing really interest on all levels. And in addition to the places that have passed right to counsel, there's, this is just a smattering of places we've spoken to that have efforts and initiatives going around the country on right to counsel. So the interest is not East Coast, West Coast, it's in the Midwest, it's in the South, it's all over. And that's really exciting. And in terms of the data is bearing out what we've always known about right to counsel. It is incredibly successful. In New York City, 86% of the tenants who are represented are staying in their homes. The filings are way down. The default rate is way down. In San Francisco and Cleveland, it's the same thing. And even tenants who don't want to stay in their units, what they're able to get with representation is additional time to move, a reduction in the rent arrears, a screening of their eviction record, all of the things that help them get out of the unit and go to another place. In Cleveland, their actual data has shown that almost half of the tenants that legal aid encountered have not wanted to stay in their units. Many of those because the conditions of their units are so poor that they actually want to transition to a new place. And without legal aid's help, the chances are that they'll wind up with a black mark on their record and a huge rent debt that will make finding new housing almost impossible. So the legal aid is really important for both keeping people in their units and for helping people, secure long-term housing stability. And we're also really pleased to see that the courts are, warming up to this idea of the right to counsel, that they're not, where they haven't been necessarily hugely excited to see right to counsel coming, that they're actually, it's not, dramatically impairing their ability to do what they, to run their courts, which is, has been their concern. So we're really excited by all of that. We're thrilled to be connected to the movement in Connecticut to provide its support. I'm going to drop a resource in the chat, which is our one-stop page for all of this information that we have on right to counsel and eviction cases. I encourage you to check it out. Contact us if you have questions. And we're thrilled to see such a broad and dynamic coalition in Connecticut having achieved such an incredible result. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, John. And John just dropped the info in the chat. Representative Porter is having some difficulty right now getting on. So we'll first go to Leslie Blateau. Leslie.
Thanks, Alex. Good evening, everyone. Like Alex said, I'm Leslie Blateau, president of the New Haven Federation of Teachers, and I represent about 1,800 members. We are teachers, social workers, school counselors, library media specialists, school psychologists who work in over 40 schools throughout the city of New Haven. I'm really glad to be here tonight. I can't say I was part of the early organizing, so I value the opportunity to learn from the presenters. And some might say, what's a teachers union doing here on an issue related to right to counsel? Some might say, how does this issue impact teachers? We know the old narrative of teacher unions, one that we're trying to work to break, but the old narrative of teacher unions is that we focus on contracts, benefits, salaries, issues facing teachers directly, and we stop there. Of course, those are important issues to me and to members of NHFT, but I want to work to shift that focus and really highlight that the work of teachers unions and the work of NHFT should absolutely not stop at bread and butter issues, but should take things much further. So part of why I said yes to come tonight is by being here, I can begin to publicly change the narrative related to the work of teachers unions, specifically NHFT. Of course, we can fight for traditional issues, like I mentioned before, but we have to fight for more. So that is why I'm here and why we absolutely support the work of the Right to Counsel Coalition. Ultimately, students' living conditions impact teachers' working conditions. So this absolutely is a union issue. They're inextricably linked. When students and their families have stable housing, students are much more able to engage in the work of school, meet the expectations of their coursework, and thrive as a member of their school community. So it makes perfect sense for teachers to be here advocating for the right to counsel for our students and for our students' families. I mean, I know firsthand, and my members know firsthand, how many serious impediments there are right now to our students' well-being in schools and classrooms. We know this is a result of COVID, result of the impacts of capitalism, racism, and other very real systemic concerns. But here's an opportunity where this coalition is, doing very real advocacy work on housing and helping families get legal assistance when they're facing eviction. And this has a direct result on quality of life for students. And then as a result, working conditions for teachers. It's so significant that this work that this coalition is doing impacts people's lives in so many ways. And I just want to express my gratitude to this coalition because your work is, of course, helping the families that you know about, but it's helping teachers who so often are called upon to do so many things in addition to teaching. But this thing that you're working on helps us do our jobs better. So that is extraordinary. And it really is in the best interest of teachers and teacher unions to continue to support this work. I can share anecdotal stories of how housing insecurity has impacted my students in their day-to-day experiences with school, on how it has impacted my students' long-term engagement with school and their longer-term outcomes. I have examples, recent memory, and in the past, where students have absolutely missed more school than they should have because of housing instability. But I think just some specific data to support this is helpful too. So in Connecticut, housing impacts graduation rates. So in 2020, homeless students graduated at a rate of 64.8%, and that's over 25 points lower than non-homeless students. So it impacts graduation rates, impacts attendance, and students missing in my classroom makes a difference to me doing my job. I mean, selfishly, and I'll name it, even though of course this is a human rights issue, but I get rated and evaluated on how my students do. So if my students aren't in my classroom, I'm not able to do the job that I want to do. And homelessness impacts attendance. 57.2% of students experiencing homelessness this year are chronically absent in our schools. And, not only are students not able to do the work that we've constructed for them, but, oftentimes then teachers are, putting in time to call different places to find them, calling family members, reaching out to the different support services in the school buildings to provide those wraparound services. But if we can prevent the problem, everyone's collective energy can be spent doing other things not related to the problem. So again, the fact that you're preventing this is really, really impressive. And then of course, this issue is a disruption to students' learning. So if a student has to move, as John, the former speaker, referenced, they might have to change schools. And every time students change schools, it's another disruption to their learning where they're losing out on their education, because we know education is deeply connected to the community that a student is a part of. And if they're switching frequently, that's going to impact their ability to connect to that community. So the bottom line, coming from me as a representative of educators in New Haven, is that right to counsel positively impacts learning, education, children, and educators. So on behalf of the New Haven Federation of Teachers, I thank this coalition for doing the work. And I want to publicly say that I, on behalf of teachers, am so eager to work with you as we continue to organize on behalf of students and their families. So thank you for the opportunity to come share this space with you all tonight. And thanks for the work that you're doing.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Leslie. As the son of a teacher, it just makes me so happy to hear those words from teachers union leader here in the state. Next up, we will have Kay Pittner, leader of a union as well, Tenants Union, here as well in the greater New Haven area of the Quinnipiac Garden Tenants Union. Kay?
Hello, everyone. How y'all doing? Oh, yes. Last summer ago, I just got involved with the Tenant Union, and it was phenomenal because things was happening here in this Quinnipiac Garden. I done seen proper manager come and go. I done seen, since I got in here on the Section 8, but since I've been here, I mean, it's been a living hell. With that being said, when I came and met Luke and Judy and them, oh man, y'all just don't know. It's like life done changed. So far, a lot of stuff got done. We had to go to the main building to raise, not like saying in a bad way, but we want to know what's going on, why we have no communication, so on and so on. It was a lot, and we got it done, which is going to take more. Also, we had some tenants here. We try to get them involved so they can. A lot of them didn't want to get involved because they were scared about being evicted, and so on. So I was really trying to reassure them, no, this is the way you take so that don't happen. And approach, just making them feel comfortable. Also, my question also is, when being evicted, how would I be reassured that I would have a lawyer attorney appoint when I go up there being evicted, or someone I know being evicted, so we can feel comfortable knowing we're not in this alone. I also want to say it takes for some of the other neighbors to get involved, to show their support. The more, put it this way, the more the merrier. If we all come together like we did with the Tenant Union, stuff would get done. But we can't do it if we just have so little. I think the more we get involved, the more and the better. But I just want to thank this Tenant Union. It did so much. It helped. They just recently did my kitchen. They did my towels. Still more work got to be done. But I'm still not satisfied because there's some I seen come and go not too long ago. And I wish I could have helped them the way I was helped. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Kay. I think the Quinnipiac Gardens Tenants Union is a really powerful example of what the tenants movement can do. And the work right here with Right to Counsel is an example of what tenants can do when they're fighting together across the state. Next up, we will have Dion Dwyer from the PT Partners, an organization that fights for the rights and grievances of tenants in the PT Barnum community in Bridgeport. Dion?
Thank you so much, Alex. Hi, guys, everyone. I appreciate you guys having me here in this space and for us to be able to have a voice for the tenants. My name is Dion, and I am the System Change Manager for PT Partners here at PT Barnum Low-Income Public Housing. I just want to reiterate and emphasize on what the Rights to Counsel law is, which is a fundamental justice law that gives poor people and families access to legal representation when something like as consequential as loss of shelter is on the line. It also means that the defendant has the right to have the assistance of a legal counsel, and if they can't afford one, then it is required by the government to appoint one or pay for the defendant's legal expense. Now, how that part, I want to emphasize on that part where it affects us here at Park City Communities, low income housing, where when the residents are going through eviction, where when you do get the paperwork in the mail, first of all, it's not very understandable with the legality of the language for the resident to understand and respond to. So when they don't respond to it properly, then they actually get proceeded to the court section of it. And when they go to court, the representation that they're supposed to get turns out that it's also a person that is representing housing. I'm not sure who wins on that part, but it's definitely not the residents as far as I'm concerned. One thing I also noticed is that when that's all said and done on the paperwork, the stipulation that you are agreeing to also has the court expenses. So exactly what is the court paying for the residents? And that's where I think the rights to counsel law will definitely come in very, very handy for the residents here at low income housing. Because as a resident here myself, I've gone through eviction notice more than once. And I know quite a few residents here who have gone through it themselves, at least once. And for one other residents, they've gone through it in a space of 10 years, 2 times, while I've gone through it in a space of 3 years, twice. Now, honestly, it doesn't matter how many years has passed since you've gone through it once or twice. Nobody wants to go through it at all, but it happens. And when it does, you're kind of hoping that there's someone there to explain the legality and the language in the paperwork for you, but there isn't. And if there is one, it's still not properly explained to you, as in the end of it all, basically all they want is their money. And you want to pay them because most of this is happening to those residents that are actually the hardworking, essential workers, head of household, Latinx or Black females, mothers that are running to work all the time to prevent this from happening in the first place. But it does. But nobody wants to get good at this. So every time, if you do get that paperwork in the mail, you're actually jarred once again if it happens more than once and you are not thinking straight as to what the procedure is to do first. So a legal representation would be very, very helpful in that situation to know who you can call, who you can talk to, who you can ask whatever question you need in order for you to understand your situation and the position in that situation. I do believe that we went through a lot to win this law, and we also don't just need the law to be passed, but we definitely need it to be fully funded as far as anyone that lives in Bridgeport as a resident or in low-income housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you, everyone, including John, Leslie, Kay, for speaking so powerfully to why we need right to counsel. Okay, so I think we're going to move on next to breakout groups. So we're going to have a little bit of change in pace here. And I think Luke is going to take over. But yeah, if Luke, you want to take over?
Yeah, thanks, Phoebe. So just to kind of break up the event here, we're going to switch to breakout groups so that everybody gets a chance to talk with each other and sort of process everything you just heard. We just heard some really powerful explanations of why right to counsel is so important. Now we're going to take about just 10 minutes or so to get into breakout groups. And, you know, I just want to, thinking of what we just heard from our speakers and the power of stories and sort of turning numbers and abstract concepts like legal counsel and really grounding it in our own experiences and human lives. You know, behind all of those stats are just human beings going through a lot when their housing is on the line. And as John said, and as all the speakers said, it's it's not just about housing, but it's about so many other things. It's about education and community and social connection and mental health, and just everything else in life is impacted. So in this discussion group, we kind of came up with these questions to just give you an opportunity to reflect on maybe a moment where you felt some insecurity about your housing. Maybe you've gone through an eviction yourself, or someone you love has, or maybe you just didn't know where you were going to live, or the rent went up on you suddenly or whatever, and you felt powerless or insecure in your housing. Think about that time and that story, and share with people in your group about, you know, how that affected the rest of your life. Or another situation you might think about is, when was a time when you knew you had rights, whether at work or in housing or in a relationship or some other context? You knew you had rights,
Yes,
but without having access to a lawyer, or without being able to navigate whatever the system was, you didn't feel like you could have your rights be protected, and where maybe having a lawyer would have made a difference in the situation. That's another kind of moment to reflect on. So we'll get into these groups for about 10 minutes or so, and just share with each other, try to listen well, and, you know, share your story, but leave space for others to share as well. And then we'll bring it back for our second round of speakers.
We're going to transition back into another set of speakers, a lot of fire and heart, who I know all of these people personally, so I'm so excited because I think it will be another great round of speakers. So our first speaker is going to be Claudette Kidd, a leader in Mothers and Others for Justice, and appointee to the Right to Counsel working group, and then Sky Thompson, our own. He's also speaking as a member of Unite Here New England Joint Board, and then Kim Hart, who's another leader in New Haven in Witnesses to Hunger, and she's also been canvassing with us. And then Justin Farmer, our Hamden City Councilor, and on the steering committee of DSA. So I will hand it over to Claudette, if you're ready.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm really happy to be here, being part of this great group that's made like massive steps so far, but still got some more to go. I'm going to go back and share a little bit of my experience with housing. And I came back over here from the UK about 7 years ago and was staying with family. And it was okay at first, and I was paying my way, paying the bills, everything. And because the reason I'd come back was because my father had passed away. And so my uncle willingly took me in. And before I knew it, all of a sudden it was like, we need more money and more money and more money, till I said, no, you know, like, I'm not the only person in this house. Like, it's got to be split evenly between everyone. And it was November, like a week before Thanksgiving, and we were put out on the streets with nowhere to go. And that was my first time ever being in that situation, being someone who's always worked, like provided for myself, you know, and then now I'm gonna have to go and try and get shelter in a shelter. That became a difficult experience. The reason being is that they kind of want, like, the definition for homeless according to HUD, it kind of changes quite frequently. So you can't keep up with it. So it's totally different from the definition in the library. And I'm going to say it now. I know I really shouldn't, but the system is set up in a way for you to fail or you have to lie. It's either or. So what are you going to do? Are you going to fail and sleep on the streets, or are you going to lie so that you'll have a bed to lie in? you know? So I had to sort of like stretch the truth a little bit just to get into a shelter. It took about, I think, 2 months to get into a shelter. Meanwhile, I was staying with my ex-husband, which wasn't very nice, and I didn't want to be there. So before going to the shelter, they put you in a motel, a really dingy motel that like you don't even want to sleep on the bed because you're scared of what might be in there. And stay there for a couple of days, and they're supposed to be paying your way. So then one morning, the manager came and said, like, we didn't get no money, so you have to pay or you have to leave. And I was like, but they were the ones who sent me here and said they were going to pay, and now they're not paying. So I had to hustle up some money, pay my way, and then start making arrangements to get into the shelter. And that was another deal because they're not answering their phone because they're busy and other things are going on, dealing with other people who are homeless. So eventually I get into the shelter, and you think shelter, you're going to be sheltered, you know, and taken care of. That was one of the worst experiences in my life. And I'm not going to name the shelter, but you kind of treated like nothing, you know, you're made to feel like you're nothing. And like, there's all these rules and regulations, and if you don't follow it, then you're written up. And if you're written up a certain amount of times, then you're out of the shelter. And I've seen people with like 3-month-old babies being put out for little things like having a wrapper on the floor, or the kids' toys are still out, just really, really stupid stuff. So it became time for me to sort of like, you know, start to get ready to leave the shelter. And I was waiting for my voucher so that I could leave. So this went on. And I was like, well, what's going on with me? How comes I haven't gotten mine yet? And there's people who's coming after me and they've gotten theirs, you know? So I think Merrill came to the shelter and started talking about Mothers and Others for Justice. And I was like, that seems like right up my alley. So got involved with that. Merrill introduced me to a state rep, that would be Robin Porter, and also to Senator Gary Winfield. I also had the Order for Fairhaven involved, and some other people from organizations who were kind of fighting for me, you know, so because you kind of have to advocate for yourself. If you don't advocate for yourself, you're not going to get absolutely nowhere. So did that. They threatened to come in and have a look around the shelter to find out what's going on. Once they did that, they gave me the voucher and was like, bye, because they didn't want no one coming in to see what was going on. But meanwhile, when you're in the shelter, your adrenaline's going all the time because you don't know what's going to happen 1 minute from the next, you know. And so moving into my apartment now, I'm really, really happy, excited, even though all we've got is like 2 fold out beds, and that was it. You know, we were just happy to be out of there. Then as time went on, it's like your body, everything just hits you all at once, you know, and this is where the mental health kicks in, you know, and like I really, really had to fight it. But my daughter with school, I listened to what Leslie Blateau was saying about what the kids are going through, and she is absolutely on target. My daughter got so depressed, gained weight, started missing school. Like I didn't even find out until one day I came home on my lunch break and she's home. And I'm like, what are you doing home? You know, and the school, sometimes they're not checking to see whether that child's in or not, or maybe they've just got too much going on that they don't even realize, you know. But my daughter's grades went from an A, B down to an F, you know, and it was awful, like, because I'm going through something, she's going through something, And like, I don't know how to help her because I'm not in my right state of mind. So I started counseling. She refused. In fact, it's taken my daughter 6 years to get counseling, to finally go into counseling by herself. And me, I've been ongoing since being in the shelter, and it's helped a lot. And because I had so much help with getting out of the shelter, then I felt the need to advocate for those who don't have a voice, you know, who can't speak up for themselves. And that's what I've been doing ever since, you know. And even in the shelters, sometimes families get separated because there could be a husband and a wife and the kids. And like, there's only one shelter that I know of that allows the whole family, and that's Christian Community Action. Other than that, the man will have to go to like Columbus House, and the woman and the kids stay together. And if that child is over a certain age, like 18, I believe, they can't be in the shelter. They've got to go. So there's all these rules and everything that you've got to, you know, abide by. Otherwise, like, they just yell and shout at you. It's almost like a prison, put it that way. So when I heard of Right to Counsel, I was like, yeah, that's right up my alley too. I'm going to jump on that one. So I got involved, speaking up. I think it was, I can't remember his name. He's not here tonight. He got me involved. Can't remember, so I can't give him credit. But he got me involved in it. And I think I met him at a witness to hunger meeting. Stephen, yes, Stephen, that's it. So I met him at a witness to hunger meeting, and we got chatting, and that was it. Like, I just set off from there, you know, and I haven't stopped. I wish I could canvas more, but like, I'm gonna work it out so that even if I do it like every other, because that's important too, because you got to recruit those people, you got to get them in, and sitting down on my behind ain't gonna do it. You know, and talk ain't going to do it, because talk is cheap. I want to see action, action, action. And I've loved it ever since. The one thing that's really, really, yeah, talk is cheap, James. The tenant associations, that's what we need in the apartment buildings. We really, really need them. And when I lived in the UK, we had them all the time, and we had things on lockdown. Everything was getting done or else. So like the canvassing, like going to these apartment complexes and talking to people about tenant associations so that they can defend themselves and stand up for themselves and advocate for themselves. This is what we need. And if these landlords see that like more and more tenant associations are coming up, they're going to think twice. And not only that, we were just speaking, like Luke in our group, that landlords, when they don't do the repairs, I feel that they should be fined at a daily rate that is pretty high until it is done. And if you don't get your security deposit back, take them to court, and hopefully a law could pass where you get 3 times the amount of your security deposit back. So you got to hit them where it hurts. You got to hit them in their pockets, because when they're evicting you, it's hurting your pockets too, and it's hurting your, it's messing with your livelihood, your mental health. Like the stress is unbelievable that you go through, and then that triggers other health issues, you know, that like you wouldn't even normally be going through, but now you're going through it. And so Right to Counsel, keep on doing what you're doing. I love you guys. I love the way you're all organized and you put things together. Sarah, thank you for helping me along the way, and like always willing to talk and emails and everything. And we need more people. More people brings more action. You know, it all works in numbers. The more we have in numbers, the more people will listen to us. And I'm going to stop there because I can talk for England. So, and let someone else have a chance. So thank you.
Honestly, I think we all want to hear you talk forever. That
Oh,
was
you want me to talk some
well,
more? I can talk more.
but we do have to move on. Thank you, Claudia, so much
Thank
for
you.
that incredible testimony. We are going to move to Sky, if you're here.
Yeah, so hello, my name is Sky Thompson. I'm a cook and a union worker. I basically started working with the CT DSA folks and the Right to Counsel Coalition the summer of 2020. At the time, I was basically looking to find some sense of reasoning around our national response to the evolving pandemic. Basically, to me, it seemed like economic recession or depression were on the horizon, and I was trying to find a way to, think about that and communicate it to my coworkers. I was basically extremely angry about many of the events that were unfolding during that summer, the contempt for so-called essential workers, the substandard stimulus package, the looting of the treasury by like elitist industry titans, the violence that followed or that was and followed the George Floyd murder. Luckily, my buddy was like, join this DSA group. And I did that, and that gave me, a much needed outlet for some frustration. My encounter thus far with the group has taught me 3 key things I think are really valuable and potentially instructive and cathartic for my coworkers. 1, evictions are violence. We've been saying that. I think it's pretty obvious. The summer of 2020 really impressed that on me very clearly and personally. The second thing I learned or more realized was that in many ways, like housing challenges have been a big part of my life even before this. And I really wouldn't have put it that way, but yeah, that kind of something I learned. And the most recent thing I've realized is the power of talking about housing as basically as a way to kind of break through, I think, kind of atomization that people feel. People are very lonely, and somehow talking about housing, especially on the doors, is something I think can kind of help them put things in a new kind of perspective. So I'm just really grateful to be a part of this coalition and this group that made some kind of meaningful change in the state. I feel as though the DSA has much to offer both my coworkers and just Connecticut in general. We basically need welcoming places to share stories about housing struggle, the violence and shame that often accompanies being caught in terrible predatory scenarios, or buried in debt, or feeling incredibly isolated. And I'm sure many here can relate to that. So yeah, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to keep sharing this perspective. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to create connections between more workers and activists. And thank you guys for your attention. Let's keep fighting. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Sky, for sharing. That was such an important message too. Okay, we are gonna move on to Kim.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I've enjoyed this whole meeting so far, and I would like to especially give a shout out to Dion, because she really touched me. And I would like to say is that yes, housing is a right. It's not a luxury. It's not something that, well, maybe you can't get it or maybe you can't. We are all have the right to housing, right? And the second thing that I want to say is that I got involved with Right to Counsel in mid-2019 when the pandemic first hit. And it was me and Kate Maloney and Johnny Shibley and of course Carrie Ellington, right? And I think we were calling people about, because we were trying to stop the rent, right? Because people were laid off. People who really needed the money were laid off, and we wanted them to stop the rent. Then I think magically, I don't know, I'm 60 years old, so I don't know. My imagination might be taken over here, but I think that I'm more into Right to Counsel. and that even if you are being evicted, that you have a right to have someone to represent you. And yep, I am a thrice convicted felon. Woo-hoo. Kim, you? Yeah, me, right? But each time I went to court, I knew there was going to be a public defender right next to me, right? Speaking on my behalf. And whenever I wanted to say something, I would look at him and he would say, yeah, you can say it or whatever, right? And so same thing in housing court, because I do know that the landlords, that they have all this, all their attorneys, all their people, right? No. Have I ever been evicted? No, I haven't. Have I ever had a notice to quit? Quite a few times. But each time it wasn't with counsel by my side. So I'm truly believing in this, that, you know, that it builds confidence, and it's helpful for us, and you know, and I just want to know, and I'm getting ready to end this right here, but I think I heard someone say that in order to get an attorney, you know, to stand with you, you have to call a number. I need some explaining. No, you know, Lucy, you got explaining to do. No, but you know, but I think that you shouldn't be required to call a number. Just like if I get arrested for doing a bad deed, I don't have to call a number for a public defender. One is automatically appointed to me. I don't like that idea of that. Okay, I'm in housing court. Okay, so well now you have to call this number. I think that's something that needs to be tweaked. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim, and I agree. Thank you so much. See you soon at Canvassing. Next, we have final speaker, Justin Farmer.
It is so good to be in community with so many of y'all that I've worked with on a multitude of issues over the years. So I'm Justin Farmer, he, him, right? I am a councilman in Hamden. I want to acknowledge that this is Black History Month, right? And so something that comes to mind, right? Right, we all know about Dr. King, right? And we all get excited about his contributions to the broader civil rights movement, right? And through that movement, right, of people coming together, right, we got things like healthcare, right, Medicare, that's civil rights legislation, right, the right to vote for everyone, right, like for everyone in our country to be seen as a person to have that right to vote, right, civil rights legislation, right. But I think something that often is hidden, right, that we don't always talk about, is, you know, in 1968, right, in April, Congress passed the Fair Housing Act, right? And that was a campaign that had begun 2 years prior, where Dr. King had been doing all this organizing, all these different issues, right? And then he went to Chicago. And he's like, oh, what? I can just do this work anywhere. And, you know, people were throwing rocks at him, and people were chastising him, and people were mocking him. But the difference here in Chicago was that it was Black people, right? And it was people who are the poorest of the poor, working class people who saw King as a bougie leader, right? Like, you don't really know what it's like to be like us, right? And so he decided and convinced his wife to move into a West Side apartment, right, in one of the worst, horrible conditions, right? In fact, the landlord found out that Dr. King was going to move in and try to fix up the apartment, and it was still deplorable by the time that they got there, right? Like, the landlord had like 3-4 months to prepare the apartment, and even then, so it was still beat, right? Um, I am not a lawyer, right? So the lawyers can explain to you what a civil Gideon is, right? But just like the civil rights movement, we are expanding civil Gideons, right? We are talking about moving the law to a place where we are supporting people, right? Just like how Kim just passionately talked about, you shouldn't have to call a number, right? This should be part of the process, right? And it's not just a process on right to counsel, right, during eviction. It's not just a criminal attorney, right? But like these are fundamental rights that we should be respecting the whole person, right? And allowing them to do the best in their community. And so I'll say two things, right? I am a son of an immigrant, right? My family immigrated here from Jamaica. I have been blessed that the majority of my life I've lived in housing, right? For the short portions of my life that we have rented, right? Initially, we were in East Rock, right? A wealthier community, a more resourced community, right? And we were gentrified out to make space for other people, right? And I often think about what opportunities, who would I be? Where would I be? How would I navigate this world if I had the opportunity, right, to be in that space? And then I think about, right, as I talked about with my breakout room, there was this family, right, with a mother and a young child dodging these steps, right? They had these big, huge metal steps, right? And these steps have just had rotten out over the years, where the mother knew it was unsafe to go up these steps, right? But the strain of trying to go to the back steps that had tons of problems, it had mold in the corridor, all these other crazy things, right? That she's taking her baby and trying to jump over these steps, right? Just to get into the door, right? And it took organizing, it took people, right? It took a campaign of pushing to get those things changed. But every single day, right? We have people who are fighting in these conditions. Every single day, right? We have our neighbors who are struggling, right? And so change has to happen, right? But that change starts with us, right? And so, it 2 years ago, it was 4 or 5 people knocking doors, talking about tenants unions, talking about organizing, talking about right to counsel, right? Right to counsel wasn't even a concept yet that we were talking about. And then 2.5 years later, right? We are the second state in the country to pass this legislation, right? Expanding civil Gideons, right? There are 3, 4, 5 tenants unions, right? Working across the state. But what we need, right? We need that people power. And so as I started with Dr. King's words, right? I just want to close on his saying, right? We are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. And in this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. There is no time for apathy or complacency. This is a time of vigorous, positive action, right? And so I am urging y'all, right, to get involved, right, to knock on doors, to make sure that people know about right to counsel, right? So many people are afraid to take the first step of action to share about what's going on in their home because they know they can be evicted, right? Like Claudette shared with us, right? They can do everything right and then be evicted, right? They can do everything right the second that they demand people treat them as a whole being, they can be out on the street, right? And so we need you to call, right, your legislators. We need you to write to people, right? But more importantly, we need you to come and help us knock doors, talk to people, organize, and be in community. And so I will be in community with you, right? We had 80 some people with us here tonight, right? But there's 3 million people in Connecticut. And until everyone, like Kim was pointing out, right, and as Dion so powerfully said, right, until every single person in these protected classes can feel a sense of pride and know that they're held down, right, none of us can feel safe. None of us can truly be free, and none of us are able to enjoy all the other wonderful things that we know that we can do and we should do, and the things that we want to do. So I thank y'all for being in community with me, and I'm so excited to pass it back. Thanks. I wasn't trying to preach.
Thank you, Justin. Thanks to all of our speakers. And if someone could throw up the slides, I mean, what Justin said, it's going to take a movement. And this is the part where we talk about like what folks can do now to build a tenants movement in Connecticut powerful enough to win permanent funding, to expand right to counsel, make it permanent, bring it everywhere, and win better tenant protections and change things both in our buildings, like with how landlords are treating us, and in the state as a whole. It's going to take a movement stronger than we had before to win permanent funding for right to counsel. We have the 2 years of federal funding to get the program seeded and to start to see a reduction in evictions from people being forced to move out of their homes. And right now it's at about like 25% of the state in terms of like tenants in those 14 zip codes, but we only have that 2 years of federal money, and we're going to need state money, a dedicated funding source to make this permanent and to bring it to everyone. This is going to need to be of tenants, labor, education, healthcare providers, legal aid, legal services attorneys. Our power is going to be in numbers, and we need to grow, the number of tenants who are involved in order to make this a permanent program. So Luke is going to talk about some of the ways we're starting now, building up to the 2023 legislative session to get a head start in building our movement and building the power we're going to need to win permanent funding for right to counsel and so much more.
Thanks, Sarah. So we put together a little link tree, which is that we'll drop it in the chat. It's right there on the slide, but it will bring you to a landing page that has kind of some basic informational stuff about right to counsel, but also right at the top is a Google form. It's really easy to fill out that asks a few questions. The main question is, have you been impacted by eviction, or do you know someone who has? So the goal there is sort of, as we were practicing in our breakout groups earlier, to start collecting stories about how eviction impacts people's real lives and how many ripple effects it has into all these other areas. Part of that is about raising consciousness. It's about getting people to think about their own experiences and realize how much that connects with right to counsel and tenants issues in general. Part of it is we need to get the word out as wide and far as we can. So this is kind of an outreach tool to talk to people in your community, in your neighborhood, in your apartment complex, in your organization. Do you have stories to tell about eviction? What does this look like in people's real lives and communities? So hopefully you can share it on social media. You can put up a flyer in your neighborhood. We want this to be like a way to really get the word out and have people be able to share their stories. And then when we get to 2023, we want to have a whole story bank of people who have direct experience that can speak to our legislature about how vital this is. Again, getting back to what I said earlier, it's not just advocating, but it's people speaking for themselves. It's really organizing the people that this most directly impacts. So that's the first thing. The other thing is, you've heard a bunch of people mention canvassing on this call. So that just means knocking on people's doors and talking to tenants about the issues that they're having. with the conditions that they're facing, you know, how it's going with their landlord, if they're worried about eviction, that kind of thing. We're doing that in Hartford, New Haven, Middletown, and Bridgeport currently. So if you're anywhere close to any of those areas, please reach out to us and just come out on a Saturday, knock some doors, talk to some tenants, kind of get, you know, as our speaker said, turn words into action, put your feet on the ground. It's an absolutely inspiring experience to just go out for an hour or two and talk to people about what's going on. Through that is how we're building our tenants unions. And finally, using the flyer, the social media graphics, the story bank form, and the Connecticut Tenants Union on social media. Please just get this word out to as many people as you can. And we want to build our coalition with organizations and just with real people that this directly impacts. So all of those ways are ways that you can contribute to this movement.
Right. And so we need to let people know about Right to Counsel. So, you know, as Kim was saying, unfortunately, it's not a system where people automatically get a lawyer. They have to call the number, although there is, you know, the flyer in their court papers. But we need to let people know about this. So we've made a flyer that you can hand out in your building to your neighbors, post in your town or city. There's social media graphics that talk both about like what Right to Counsel is and how people can access it, and how to get involved in the tenants movement in Connecticut to win permanent funding and so much more. And the Linktree link there, which someone will throw in the chat, is how you can get the flyer as well as the social media graphics. And like if you want to present about Right to Counsel, about, you know, what we're doing here, organizing tenants and building power, please like reach out to us and we can support you with that, do it with you. And also just want to know like what people are doing to spread the word and build the movement.
Thank you everyone so much for coming. This was such a great night.